Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It is a Thursday morning here in the upper Midwest. We got snow on the ground, as you can see. It makes the lounge warm and comfortable. The kitchen's nearing completion, so I'm excited about that. We're getting close to the point where we're going to be serving coffee, and our inspections went really well yesterday. Because the building inspector came by, we have a few things to do, handicap bars in the bathroom, that kind of stuff. And the health inspector came by, and it was basically just a few signs and then some emails and inspecting sign-offs I got to email to her as well. But like, we're really getting close now, which is exciting. You know, hopefully by December 1st, we'll be soft opening, maybe even hard opening by middle of the month, grand opening. But we'll see. I appreciate all your support. It's been a long, difficult year. It's put some strain on me, my wife, and getting those good reviews from our inspectors yesterday was quite a relief. I teared up a little bit. I was just so... it's been a lot. I passed my food exam on Tuesday, and that was... you stress about it, even though it wasn't that bad. It was pretty easy. But still, it's a long journey to get here, I'll tell you that. But life requires growth, and this has certainly been that. For those of you who can get anything from Peace Coffee, the Morning Glory is the most incredibly savory, aromatic, lovely blend. It's just such a great roast. It's what we're going to be serving here. Peace Coffee Morning Glory blend. It's absolutely blissful. It's supple, buttery. It's not bitter, but it's not empty and vacuous. There's like body to it, you know. It's just gorgeous. So today we're going to do another Reacts to. And it's something that I popped on the other day, and the song just jumped out at me. I was just like, whoo! And again, sometimes when you listen to a record, you gotta, especially when you're streaming something, you're like, oh, who is this? Who are the sidemen? That stuff's not as readily available to us when you have the vinyl sitting in front of you and you look at the sidemen before you put it on. But before we dive into that, I'm going to share a little Bethlehem thing again. It's a record I've talked about probably ad nauseum, but it's a hard record to come by. Cohn was married to her for a while, Marilyn Moore. She sings a lot like Billie Holiday. And this is a pretty tough record to come by, probably from the late 58, 59, towards the end of the BCP Bethlehem series, number 73. And it's a wonderful collection of songs. And the band here is outstanding. You have the rhythm section of Hilton, Galbraith, and Johnson, O.C. Johnson, Milton, and Barry Galbraith, all legends, all part of that rhythm section, the great rhythm section that's just so incredible. You have the great Joe Wilder on the trumpet. And those of you who watch this channel for any length of time know how big a Joe Wilder fan I am. Few people can lyrically sing a ballad to you this side of Sweets Edison like the great Joe Wilder can. One of my favorite players that's really kind of overlooked. Cohn is on this, again, married to Marilyn. He plays bass clarinet on some tracks. And there's a Don Abney on the piano. And if I'm honest, Don Abney is the one name on here I don't really know very well. Even though it says Don Abney and his orchestra, which is ironic because like all the other names are famous, and he's certainly not in today's world. I'm sure someone out there can tell me something about it. But there's Cohn, it looks like right there in the front. I guess they were friends with Billie Holiday, as I've said before. And I think Billie Holiday actually babysat their child at times. And Cohn is also magnificent on this. The whole record's fantastic. But I was listening to it the other day while I was kind of doing some things in here. I got the lounge back, so I'm actually digging into the records again, which is so wonderful for me. It's been a long kind of hiatus where things were too dirty to really start playing jazz records. But Traveling All Alone, a tune that's attributed to a guy by the name of J.C. Johnson. I'm not sure who that is. And I've heard other people do this song, but it's this version here that we're going to talk about today. And it starts off just beautiful, lyrical. Al Cohn giving you some. This is the kind of jazz. Again, the Billie Holiday is just incredible in her voice. This is the kind of jazz I feel like people want, but then get misled to so many other places by some of the jazz extremists and enthusiasts who are pushing and promoting, all the stuff that shows how cool they are. And so people who dive into jazz and are curious about it never get exposed to this stuff. That's what they actually really want. And it's jazz like this that gets played in films. On a Parisian sidewalk, in a New York cafe, the top of the Empire State Building, that urban fabric, that romantic moment, that alley with the garbage cans and the fire escape and the park that's dimly lit with the mist and a cat fight and a gal on a bench and all that kind of noir world. Jazz colored. Jazz added dimension. And we hear it throughout our lives. And without ever knowing it or putting a thumb on it, it's just omnipresent. And jazz is not something that any of us have never heard. Most of us know nothing about it, yet most of us are familiar with it, which is a strange dichotomy. And so I think when someone gets curious about jazz, it's from all the places it's appeared in their lives to illustrate melancholy, to illustrate romance, to illustrate urbanity, to illustrate swing. There's so many things that jazz can embody, and it does so in film and theater, and has so for a century. And so it's familiar to us more than we realize. And I feel like it's stuff like this that we're looking for. Cohn's just dreamy here. It's just wonderful stuff. I'm going to pause that for a second because, as we know, Bethlehem loves to block videos. Obviously, it's not the Bethlehem people that are behind it. I think it's Universal or someone now who owns this stuff. But there's some wilder moments on this. I hope I didn't miss while I was talking. This is nice Abney in there. Nice piano. I feel like if this was the jazz that we tried to give people, jazz would have a much bigger audience. And that's, I think, one of the great tragedies. Is that we can love Ornette, we can love Coltrane, we can even love Miles and Gill. I mean, that Twin Peaksy vibe. Joe Wilder. That's it. I mean, that's just so gorgeous. He plays the mute as well as anybody, like I said, this side of Sweet Edison. His lyricism, his melancholy, his ability to support a singer is really where he probably scores his highest marks. And that's not to say he doesn't swing hard. He played with Basie. I mean, he's got quite the pedigree. He has a couple fantastic records on Columbia. There's one on Savoy. Joe Wilder's a real, a great forgotten legacy guy. But it's Wilder as a sideman, often with singers. That's often made me weak in the knees. It's just like, ooh, that's what I was looking for. I need to play that. And I have some proof of this. These songs I find that I curate and I dig them out of the sand. And I'm like, this is from all these millions of jazz songs. I think it's songs like this that people will love. And when I played them at the brunch gigs over the years, the response, the shazamming, the people coming up and asking about it, the young kids being excited about jazz. Because I played it next to other things that they liked and knew, and it somehow didn't feel out of place. And I knew how to play jazz that was going to add and not take away from the moment. It wasn't going to drive anybody away. And again, that's my greatest issue with the avant-garde and the new free jazz people, is that you're driving away the audience. You're not bringing them in. And that's part of my deception, is I actually like a lot of that stuff. But I'm trying to help people love jazz. And as a DJ, you kind of learn what components of music people love. And difficult isn't something most people love. Simple, beautiful, melancholic, sensual. These are things that are attractive in nature. But today's episode is going to be about this song. What's New? By the Italian-born, I think it's in Sicily, if I remember, George Wallington. That wasn't his real name. His nickname in school was Wallington because he dressed nice. And he carried that name through most of his career, if not all of it. Jazz of the Carriage Trade. This might have been recorded before this release. No, it's recorded 56. So this is actually from 56, so this is its first issuing. A tough record to come by, if I'm honest. You don't see it around a ton. Outstanding band. And if you look carefully, the one young brother in there, that's young Donald Byrd. He's probably working with Transition at this point, doing some of that early stuff. He's probably appeared on a few Blue Notes as a sideman at this point. But Bird's still a fairly young figure. He's probably played with Blakey and Silver and Mobley and the Messengers. And Wallington's a fine piano player. And we have Art Taylor on the drums and Teddy Kotick on the bass. You know, both fine legacy players. So you have really a great established rhythm section with Wallington, Kotick, and Art Taylor. And you have Donald Byrd on the trumpet, who's a kind of young, fiery guy, which is what he brings to this. But I was listening to this streaming the other day on a station I play, a Grant Green station, believe it or not. And this came on, and I was like, I didn't know what it was. I was busy working in my brother's shop. And it was when the saxophone came in. And I was like, oh, who is that? Who is that? I needed to know. So I picked him. At first I tried to guess. And I honestly thought it was John Coltrane. And I had no idea it was Wallington. I had no idea what record it was. I'm like, that sounds like John Coltrane on the tenor. And so I had to go find my phone, put down what I was doing, and look at who was playing that tenor saxophone with George Wallington. And then, of course, Donald Byrd comes in after the saxophone. And I was like, by that time, I already knew that Byrd was coming. And Byrd shreds. He brings some elements to this. At this slow, lagging tempo, he's throwing sparks. And it's wonderful to hear his electricity, his youthful bravado, his antlers are growing. You know what I mean? As a young man, we got to grow those antlers. We need accomplishment, achievement, and those things breed confidence, which breeds antlers. Without achievement and without accomplishment, we are nothing. We have no sense of self. And for me, not to go off on a side tangent, but today's generation of kids struggle so much because so little of their accomplishment and achievement is in the real world. It's almost all virtual. And that virtual achievement doesn't translate into real life currency. So your virtual accomplishments, your avatar is a stud. But that guy you look at in the mirror every morning, he's lacking. And you can't lie to yourself. You can think, oh, I'm accomplishing, but we know in the end when we really are, when we really aren't. by how we feel about ourselves and how satisfying that day was and how long we choose to remember that day and cherish it. When we do fluff and do nothing, those days fade away. It's those days where we accomplish things that we feel great about, that have real value and merit. And so Wallington's beautiful. And it could have been Garland, it could have been Wynton Kelly. And my earbuds were just like, this is wonderful. And I just was quite content. And actually, no, it was probably a Red Garland station that I was listening to. So I thought maybe it was some kind of Red Garland. I have a lot of Red Garland vinyl. But he continued making records on Galaxy and Muse into the 70s and probably in the 80s, I remember. And so, I mean, maybe it was some later Garland I didn't know. But just when this tenor sax comes in here. And remember, Garland played with Coltrane a lot. I was like, if this is Coltrane, this is ballad-like. This is gorgeous. And he does some beautiful ballad work on Prestige in those early years during the Sheets of Sound. But listen to that tone. There's some youthful bursts in there, but there's also a melancholy, a subtle drifting. And he's just emoting from a wonderful place. And who are we talking about? We're talking about Phil Woods. And Phil Woods, of course, and Donald Byrd. Phil was, of course, a fairly well-regarded player. Worked a lot with Gene Quill in the 50s. Had a lot of success in the 60s. And was actually considered one of the leading saxophone players in a lot of the polls, believe it or not. A great player. And that's one of the weird things that we've talked about on this channel before. Those jazz polls from the 50s and the early 60s, whether you're talking Playboy or Donald Byrd, whether you're talking Downbeat or whether you're talking the Playboy polls, they're filled with the white cats. Those voters voted on the records and artists they knew, from the labels that had good distribution. And it's really clear and apparent when you dig deep into the canon that most of the black artists we hold in high esteem today, the innovators, the movers and the shakers, the creative forces, almost all were under the radar in the Jazz Age itself. And remember, the great Jazz Age was fizzling. And almost all the names that we value and think of today as cherished come along at the last gasp of the Jazz Age, where the audience was mostly dissipated and gone. So these artists didn't reach any kind of stardom or fame in that moment. Guys like Hank Mobley, Lee Morgan, they were all very obscure. It was a guy like Phil Woods, Shorty Rogers, Bud Shank. These guys were filling the charts and the polls because those records had better distribution. There's a much bigger white population. And so when you look at a Playboy saxophone tenor poll from 1958, 1961, most of those names will have slipped into a sort of obscurity here. A sort of ambiguity. And by no means is Phil Woods an ambiguous figure. But he's certainly not the name today that he was in the 1950s and early 60s. And he makes a great string of records. You know, he's a guy that's around a long time. And Woods delves into some aspects of psychedelia even. You know, he's really an explorer player that borrows from Coltrane, tonality-wise, and was very experimental and a fantastic player that really gets overlooked a lot today. His work on Prestige, where he has a number of records as a leader. Phil Woods is, he's dynamite. He really is. And of course, Donald Byrd is a well-documented name today. But again, Byrd was a pretty anonymous figure. It's cool that he slipped into this group here. And what's weird is it says Art Taylor on the drums. But I only see one brother on the front. Is there a second Art Taylor? That's Wallington with the umbrella. Phil Woods. Huh. That's a good question, jazz people. Who's on the cover here? And is there an Art Taylor that's a white guy that's a drummer Because we all know there's an Art Taylor that's a brother, but he's certainly not pictured on that cover. And of course, the New York carriage rides are a pretty famous part of the New York Central Park, the Plaza experience. You walk out front of the Plaza, and there's a line of horses ready to take you around the town in style. Just watch the Seinfeld episode where Kramer takes over one of his friend's horses for a day, feeds it beefaroni, and the horse farts all over some of the Twin Peaks cast members who made appearances. I think it was season 7 of Seinfeld. I've been going through Seinfeld again. It's been a while since I watched it all. It's pretty great stuff. It really is. I really enjoy it. It's irreverent. It never makes the effort to teach you something or to hug for no reason or to be anything but irreverent. You know, and Larry David was the king of irreverence and just really understood how to kind of poke people in the eye with a giggle. You know what I mean? The contest. It's fun stuff. But anyway, it's kind of a prestige title that gets overlooked some, in spite of Donald Byrd being on, in spite of Wallington being a great player and Phil Woods being a great player, and in spite of having a great cover. It's a pretty rare prestige 7,000 sequence. It's like 7035 or 7032, 1956. So great stuff. The Marilyn Moore piece, I mean, she's really, that record, it's her one piece. You know, which, again, I think her and Cohn had a child, and as that child grew up, she put her singing aside to raise that child. And I think she stayed married to Cohn for at least a decade, if memory serves. And by that time, her career just never really took off again. She might have played in lounges again at some point, if I remember. But again, I'm not sure. It's been a while since I looked at her bio. But that one record is her one legacy piece, and it's a fantastic record. If you ever stumble on it, it's worth up to $100. And it's going to go for 80, 70, 80, $100 now anyway. Old Bethlehem's are getting rarer. Her fans are fairly ardent, and so there's been enough people who have bought her stuff for a decent price that any seller's going to look that up and find out. So you're not likely to stumble on that Marilyn Moore record for less than $50, $60 anywhere. And if you do, grab it. But if you find that record in decent condition, and honestly, it's probably a record that could use a decent reissue. I mean, it's a fantastic piece that she's channeling Billie Holiday. She's doing a lot of Billie Holiday's material, which obviously wasn't Billie Holiday's material. It was the songbook. It was just songs that Holiday was known for doing. And she just nails it. She absolutely nails it. So, great record, both of them. And we'll talk to you all soon. I appreciate all of you guys so much. I enjoy all the conversations we have. And I do want to add one thing. I get a lot of messages to watch something, check something out, watch this documentary. I appreciate all that. But I must confess, I don't have time to do most of it. You know, my days are so filled right now. And by the time it's evening time where it's time to unwind and maybe watch something, I got to consider my wife. And we need to spend a couple hours of time together before one of us goes to bed. And so the time I spend kind of decompressing or decomposing in a Seinfeld sense, it's often occupied by me and my wife's time together. And so that time frame where I would watch some of the stuff you guys share with me, it just doesn't exist. The Ron Carter thing, I want to get to that. There's always stuff that I'm like, ooh, I need to spend some time watching that. And maybe once this coffee shop opens, during some of the dead times, I'll be able to take some of that stuff in. Although, again, listening to records is going to be the prime directive, not watching YouTube. But there'll probably be room for both. So I think I'm going to be down here 10, 12 hours a day, most days, me and my records. So even though I've not been in here much, listening to music the last 2-3 months, with the mess and the dust, I will have no choice but to be locked in this room for hours digging through records. So I'm going to be sharing a lot of stuff coming up on the Facebook groups, on the coffee shop Facebook page, on the YouTube channel. There's going to be a lot of material, I think, coming, because listening is what drives my inspiration. It's listening that makes those sparks fly and that connection. I'm like, oh, That's special. And it's when I get that little stream of consciousness flowing and something starts speaking to me, that's when I like to set the camera up and start recording. And those are the episodes that most people are like, oh, you were on fire today. You preach it. I get the preach comments a lot too when that stream of flow starts coming out. And it's not something you can fake. It's not something you can force. The inspiration has to be legitimate. I really have to hear something that makes me go, oh, that makes me feel something. And then that feel makes me think something. And that feeling and that thinking leads to a stream of thought that is often just an inner monologue with myself. And this might sound strange to some of you, but I feel like my consciousness and my life exchange ideas. This body's a 50-year-old being that's experienced a limited amount. My consciousness is connected to a much bigger reality. And my consciousness informs my ignorant self a lot and reveals and says things. And a lot of my aha moments and epiphanies is the dumb me, the hairless monkey, connecting with the consciousness going, oh, yeah, boy, you're right. And so that inner monologue is often going on when stress and life aren't interfering with that. And when I capture that on tape, on video recording for an episode, those episodes always go great. The stream of thought is pretty seamless and the ideas are flowing. And I'm hoping I can get back to that more often because it's been tough with the stress and all the things and the emails and it's been a pretty crazy time. So I'm going to wrap it up today. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you want to support the channel, please go to Patreon and, pledge a few bucks a month. It does help, and I do appreciate that help. And I'm hoping once this cafe gets open, I can start using my Patreon earnings to start buying some cool collectible records for the shop. That's kind of my hope, is there'll be enough income for me to use that money just to buy cool records. And be able to share them all with you, and to be able to dive into them and review them, and to help those jazz fans who want to dig deeper beyond just the reissue programs and beyond just what's cool on YouTube today, and to really get to the roots of the breadth of this music and how deep and wide a chasm this music carved. Because it really created an underbelly that changed the world. Jazz is a powerful force. A force for communication, a force for healing, a force for improvised emoting. And I'm going to try to put a few things on the menu that deal with build your own and call them improvisers. The jazz sandwich, the jazz cocktail, the jazz drink. There's got to be ways we can improvise with our food and say, I want this, this, and that. And that's what jazz is like. This is what I'm in the mood for. This is what my soul needs to say today. So I'm excited, I'm exhausted, but I'm also re-energized. I'm also, like I was telling my wife, I'm looking forward to what's going to happen this next year. I think it's going to be a great time. And if anybody is in the upper Midwest, make a point of coming to this coffee shop, hanging out, listening to some records, and let's talk about this music. And I think talking is the most important thing we can do as humans. When the dialogue ceases, when the conversation stops, growth also ceases to exist. And this politically correct climate, the woke culture, the burying all of our history and past under the blanket so no one ever has to confront it, is actually stymieing the healing. We're allowing it to close up with a very infected pussy inside. And that will only sustain the discord. And they're playing right into the hands of those who want the divide to remain. It's exposure to light, to air, to sunlight, to ignorance that leads to growth. An argument isn't just two people yelling. An argument is a chance for someone to have their viewpoints challenged. And some will never change their viewpoints and are stuck in their ruts, and that's okay. But at least I know where you come from. Other times it's that conversation that can take two different groups, two different communities, and find a commonality. Find a place of empathy. Because I understand now better who you are, what you come from, what you believe in, and what you stand for. And I stand for most of those same things. So dialogue is such an important thing, and I think this channel provides that. The comments are always so wonderful and intelligent. It's a great community. Again, love you all. Be safe. Talk to you soon. Peace.